So for this video, I wanted to respond a little bit, I guess, to something that was sent to me by my brother, actually. It was a video of a high dive platform in Sweden, I believe. And it was 10 minutes, unnarrated, just a video camera on the high dive platform, and recording people trying to build up the courage ultimately to jump off this, I think it was a 10-meter platform. And they were mic'd up, there was a microphone up there so you could hear them talking to themselves. It was just really interesting, just 10 minutes of that, all different types of people. Some that jumped, some that didn't, but you watched the process as they kind of looked at the water and as they thought about it, and really, really interesting. And when he sent me that, he also sent me kind of his thoughts on it and what he thought was interesting and the takeaways he had about it. So I want to get into some of that a little bit. So I'll start by saying, like, the video itself was interesting, and he called out a few things that I think were interesting about it. One of which was, the prediction of people that you thought would jump versus those that you might thought wouldn't have. For example, there was a tattooed, kind of long-haired guy who's, kind of looked to be playing the part of a tough guy who did not jump, didn't have the courage to do it, or didn't want to do it, whatever, versus a middle-aged woman who seemed like there was no way she was going to do it, but she did. So that was interesting, kind of just that, what you would predict versus what actually happened was real interesting. But his big takeaway from the video was, partially the fear that you saw, right? For a lot of people, there was a lot of fear there and how paralyzing that was. But what he talked about was, the people that overcame it, the people that were able to talk themselves into it, the people that were able to build up, the courage or what have you to do it. And in one instance, somebody said something along the lines of, like, think about how good it's going to feel once you do it. And what he talked about with that is, you almost in effect set a goal, that there was a goal put in place, and the existence of that goal or that objective that you wanted to achieve this, you wanted to jump off the platform, you wanted that feeling of euphoria having done it, you wanted to be able to look back positively on it, whatever it is, that allowed you to break through. It allowed the fear, you to break through the fear and actually do it. And then he took that and he applied that to real life and said, starting a business, going back to school, traveling around the world, quitting your job, whatever it is, right? All these different scenarios, that, maybe there's a parallel there where in those instances, setting the goal, right, is a key piece of it. If you set the goal, then you'll be able to, that'll help you push through the inertia and the fear you might have and actually get you working towards it. And I think there's truth to that. I do. I think there's logic in that. I think it's true. You do need to set your objective and set that goal. But I want to kind of push on that a little bit and maybe think about it from a different perspective. So the first place my mind goes when I heard that, as it often does, is to math. Because as I always say, I believe our mind is constantly doing a cost-benefit analysis for any action or decision we're making. So if you take it back to the high dive platform, those people that were looking over the edge, they were looking at the cost and the potential risks of death or injury if they jumped off this thing and things went wrong, versus the benefits of, again, the euphoria you get, the feeling of accomplishment, being able to tell your friends, whatever those benefits were. And for some people, it netted out where the benefits won and they jumped. For some people, it netted out where the costs were just too high. Or maybe the benefits, likewise, were just so low, they just didn't see any value in it. And even if the cost wasn't that high, it was still too high to do it. So you bring that back to, what my brother was talking about. And I think by identifying that goal, by stating that objective, you are effectively boosting the benefit side of that equation. You're convincing yourself or telling yourself or making it more clear to yourself that there is something to be gained from this. So I do believe mathematically it's true that by setting that goal, you increase the likelihood that you will actually achieve it and that you will do that thing. And he talked about it in terms of learning to speak Spanish. And that, if there was a goal, if there was a reason to learn it, maybe you're moving to a Spanish-speaking country or what have you, the likelihood, that you do it goes up. And that goal gives you the energy to break through and do it. And again, I think that's true. But what I wonder is if it's the full story or the right story, even. So if you stick with this math metaphor, what I think is the way he's looking at it, and he talked about it in the video that, or in his summary of it, that if you set the goal and you say, all right, I'm going to practice speaking Spanish 30 minutes every day, right? It's almost like you're constantly up on that high dive platform and you need to convince yourself that this is something you want to do. And by setting the goal, it'll help you do that, and you'll, do it for the 30 minutes every day, and you'll get there. What I think in that framework or that process, or I should say in that framework, the focus is very much on the process. So in terms of the math analogy, the focus in that, and thinking of it of setting the 30 minutes every day and your goal helps you do that, you're very much focused on, all right, I just want to make sure I get the math right? If I set up this structure in such a way and I set up my equation the right way, and I know all the rules of how I'm supposed to do the math and addition, subtraction, what have you, and I have it all set up right, I should be good, right? I should be able to get to the answer I want to get to, and it should kind of sustain itself, and I should go forward with this thing. It's a very process-oriented view. Again, the idea being set the goal, do it for a certain amount of minutes each day, all that stuff. And I think there's value in that. But I think it's missing the fact of checking to see if your inputs are right to begin with, right? The idea of identifying, do I have the right variables, the right numbers, the right inputs on the cost side? Do I have the right numbers, variables, inputs on the benefit side? Because if you just focus on the process and actually doing the math, it's the whole concept of kind of garbage in, garbage out. You could do all the math right. You can get the process exactly right. You've set your goal, you put it on a vision board, you declare it, you tell your wife you're going to do it, you set a plan and a structure where I'm going to do it for 30 minutes every day. You put all that in place. You do all the math beautifully. You lay it all out. It looks fantastic. But for some reason, it still doesn't happen, right? You're still not actually working towards that goal. You get it conceptually. You've done all the math. You've done all the work. It should work, but it doesn't. You can almost think of it like a multiple choice test where you do it all, you get to your answer and you look, and that's not one of the 4 answers. And you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like I did all the work right. The process was there. The process was right. Again, I think what you're missing is checking the inputs to make sure your inputs are right. So let's stick with this learning to speak Spanish example that he brought up. Let's say he did all that, but he didn't learn to speak Spanish. You might be confused by that. You might say, hey, what's up here? Like, right, did I miss something in the process? Should it have been 35 minutes every day instead of 30? Should I have done something else? Instead of telling my wife, should I have told my dad? Like, what's up? I think what you're missing is that you may not have valued those inputs correctly. And the way I often say it, and I say it to him sometimes, is somebody's lying, right? And I mean that internally for him in this scenario. You're stating these inputs that in an assumption in those inputs is that the benefit outweighs the cost. Whatever you expect to get out of learning to speak Spanish outweighs whatever the costs are, the time commitment, the pain and the trouble in actually learning it, the cost of whatever software you buy. And that may not be true, right? Somebody's lying in that, right? Because you believe it to be true. You believe that you want to learn to speak Spanish and you've set up your process to do it in the right way, but for some reason it doesn't happen. What I would argue is, again, something's off in the inputs and you're not accurately looking at it. There's some cost that you haven't realized in this, or the benefit, the goal that you've stated, right? And the benefit that comes along with it, you don't actually believe. You want to believe it, maybe you aspire to believe it, but it's not real. That's somebody's lying here. You're overvaluing, overweighting that benefit. But at the end of the day, that calculation that's done, your mind's going to uncover that. It's going to recognize that, hey, that benefit is that you think is there, it's not there. And then the actions you take are going to play out as such. So you don't see it. You don't realize that you've missed the input on the benefit side. It seems to be a process issue, but it's not. It's an input issue. It's an understanding the numbers that go into it up front. And I think the thing I'm pushing on here, the thing to maybe add to this theory or this framework that he put forth, is to be careful not to focus too much on the process, or solely on the process. You have to do that honest evaluation up front of your inputs, of the objective you've actually set, if it actually is the objective you want to hit, the costs, right? It's easy to say like, yeah, I'll make time, but you have kids at home, you have a job, you have a family, you know, all those sorts of things, and you're not accurately evaluating the cost either. So, you know, if you think about it in those terms of, you know, why isn't it happening? I come back to the idea of somebody's lying, which said another way in the math analogy is like, hey, let's check your inputs here. Let's see if these are actually what we think they are. And I think in combination, once you've done that piece, then you focus on the process and say, okay, I know this is the goal. I know I want to achieve this. I know I've evaluated it, I've thought through it, and it's something I definitely want to do. Now put the process in place. Now set up the structure to actually go forward and achieve it. And I think that sets you up most for success.